Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
Living in a serene suburban community had seemed like a dream to Ethan and his wife Olivia when they purchased their charming two-story home in Meadowbrook Heights. They imagined quiet evenings on their porch, a safe environment for their toddler, Sophie, and the perfect balance of privacy and neighborly camaraderie. Little did they know that their dream home would become the epicenter of a clash with a domineering homeowners association president. Ethan, a 38-year-old software engineer with a knack for problem solving, was about to find himself in the most unexpected challenge of his life. It all started innocuously enough, a delay in their mail delivery, followed by packages arriving with signs of tampering. At first, Ethan dismissed the issue, blaming the postal service. But when Olivia's online orders arrived half-open and Sophie's birthday card from her grandparents was missing a gift card, suspicion crept in. "Ethan, have you noticed how weird our mail's been lately?" Olivia asked one evening, holding a crumpled package addressed to her. Ethan glanced up from his laptop, frowning. "Now that you mention it, yeah, something's off. Maybe it's just rough handling during delivery?" "This feels deliberate," Olivia said, shaking her head. "I've never seen anything like this." Ethan's curiosity turned into determination. "I'll work from home tomorrow and see if I can catch anything unusual." The next day, Ethan set up his home office near the front window, which had a clear view of their mailbox. Around noon, a shiny black Audi rolled up to their curb. To Ethan's astonishment, Greg Larson, the homeowner association president, stepped out. Greg was a man in his mid-50s, always impeccably dressed, with a reputation for being unyieldingly strict about the community's rules. As Ethan watched, Greg opened their mailbox and began flipping through their mail with the nonchalance of someone who had done this 100 times. Ethan stormed outside. "What do you think you're doing with my mail, Greg?" Greg's face remained stoic, though his hands froze mid-action. "Mr. Riley, I was conducting a routine security inspection. It's my responsibility as homeowner association president to ensure the neighborhood remains safe." Ethan's jaw dropped. "By stealing our mail? That's not security, that's illegal." Greg straightened his blazer. "Don't be dramatic, Ethan. I'm simply ensuring there's no contraband or suspicious material that could jeopardize our community." "Contraband? Are you serious?" Ethan exclaimed. "You've crossed a line, Greg. This ends now." Greg handed the mail back and walked off, muttering something about ungrateful residents. Shaking with frustration, Ethan went inside and immediately called Olivia. "He's going through our mail," Ethan said, pacing the living room. "We need to do something." "He's always acted like he owns the neighborhood," Olivia replied. "But this is too much. What can we do?" Over the next week, Ethan delved into research, learning that tampering with mail was a federal crime punishable by fines and even prison time. He also discovered other residents, quiet, reserved families like theirs, who'd noticed similar issues but were too afraid to confront Greg. Ethan decided to attend the upcoming homeowner association meeting to expose Greg's actions. The meeting was held in the community center, an unassuming building that contrasted sharply with the neighborhood's pristine homes. Residents filed in, many of them casting curious glances at Ethan. He sat near the front, his heart pounding as Greg began droning on about landscaping violations and the importance of holiday decor uniformity. When the open forum began, Ethan stood, holding a folder filled with evidence. "I'd like to address a serious issue, mail tampering in our neighborhood." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Greg's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Riley, if this is about that misunderstanding last week," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. "It's not a misunderstanding. Tampering with mail is a federal offense. I've spoken to neighbors who've experienced the same. Greg Larson has been opening and inspecting residents' mail under the guise of security. This isn't just unethical, it's illegal." Greg's face turned crimson. "How dare you accuse me without proof?" Ethan held up his phone, playing the video he'd captured. The room erupted in whispers and exclamations. Residents exchanged shocked glances as Greg's image rifled through Ethan's mail on the screen. "This is outrageous," a woman in the back said. "He's been doing this to all of us?" Greg tried to regain control. "I've only ever acted in the community's best interests." Ethan stepped closer to the front. "Breaking the law isn't in anyone's best interest. If this doesn't stop, I'll report it to the authorities." The meeting ended in chaos, with residents demanding accountability and Greg storming out. Ethan knew this wasn't the end of their battle, but he was ready for whatever came next. The days following the homeowner association meeting were anything but quiet. Ethan's stand against Greg Larson had sparked a wave of discontent within Meadowbrook Heights. Some residents began sharing their own grievances, while others seemed hesitant to speak out, wary of Greg's influence and his penchant for retaliation. For Ethan and Olivia, the battle was far from over. It started subtly, a citation left on their doorstep for having trash bins visible, even though their bins were neatly stored behind a fence. The next day, a notice arrived claiming their lawn was half an inch too tall. Olivia found it laughable at first, but Ethan recognized these as deliberate acts of intimidation. "He's trying to wear us down," Ethan muttered as he crumpled the latest citation. "He wants us to give up and back off." "What do we do?" Olivia asked, concern etched across her face. "We can't keep letting him push us around." Ethan thought for a moment. "We fight back, but smartly. If he's going to use the rules against us, we'll hold him to the same standards." The plan started with a quiet campaign. Ethan began documenting every citation, photographing their yard and property to prove compliance with homeowner association guidelines. Olivia reached out to other neighbors, gathering stories of Greg's overreach and rule bending. Slowly but surely, a pattern emerged. Greg had been using his position to selectively enforce rules, targeting those who opposed him, while ignoring violations by his allies. Ethan and Olivia compiled their findings into a detailed report and submitted it to the Homeowner Association Board. Despite Greg's position as president, the board was obligated to review the complaint. However, Ethan knew Greg would likely try to dismiss or bury the issue, so he devised a backup plan. One Saturday morning, Ethan installed a second discrete camera, this time positioned to monitor their driveway and mailbox. He also filed a formal complaint with the local postmaster, including the footage he'd captured of Greg tampering with their mail. By now, the postal inspector had opened an investigation, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before Greg's actions caught up with him. The tension escalated when an anonymous flyer appeared in mailboxes throughout Meadowbrook Heights. The flyer accused Ethan of being a troublemaker, intent on tearing down the homeowner association and creating chaos in the community. Olivia was livid, but Ethan remained calm. "This just proves he's feeling the heat," Ethan said. "We're getting under his skin." At the next homeowner association meeting, the atmosphere was electric. The community center was packed, with more residents in attendance than Ethan had ever seen. People whispered among themselves, glancing at Greg, who sat at the front of the room with his usual air of authority, though his forced smile betrayed his unease. When the meeting opened to resident concerns, Ethan stood up once again, holding the folder of evidence he and Olivia had painstakingly compiled. "I'd like to revisit the issue of selective enforcement and misuse of authority within the homeowner association," he began, his voice steady. Greg immediately interrupted. "Mr. Riley, we've already addressed your baseless accusations." "They're not baseless," Ethan cut him off, raising his voice slightly. "This folder contains documentation of rule violations by residents you've ignored, while others, including my family, have been targeted for minor or non-existent infractions. I've also included video evidence of you tampering with our mail, which is now under investigation by federal authorities." The room erupted into a mixture of gasps and murmurs. Greg's face turned pale, and for a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "If you want transparency, here it is," Ethan continued, holding up a printed copy of the Homeowner Association bylaws. "These rules exist to ensure fairness, not to be weaponized against residents who disagree with the president." Several residents stood to voice their support. One neighbor, an elderly man named Richard, recounted how Greg had fined him for a fence height violation while ignoring an identical fence on another property. A young mother tearfully shared how Greg had threatened her with legal action over her kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. By the end of the meeting, the board reluctantly agreed to form an independent committee to review Ethan's complaints and investigate Greg's conduct. It was a small victory, but a significant one. For the first time, it felt like the community was standing together against Greg's tyranny. That night, as Ethan and Olivia sat on their porch, watching Sophie chase fireflies in the yard, they allowed themselves a moment of relief. But they knew the fight wasn't over. Greg wouldn't go down without a fight, and Ethan was prepared for the next round. The fallout from the homeowner association meeting sent shockwaves through Meadowbrook Heights. The newly formed independent review committee began interviewing residents, collecting testimonies, and poring over the mountain of evidence Ethan had provided. Greg Larson, once untouchable, now found himself under intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Rileys braced for the inevitable retaliation. It didn't take long. Within days, Ethan received a notice claiming that his driveway did not meet homeowner association cleanliness standards. Olivia found it on the windshield of her car, an obvious attempt to bypass the mail system that was now under federal investigation. Ethan simply photographed the notice and added it to his growing file of evidence. But Greg wasn't done yet. Late one night, Ethan's doorbell camera captured footage of a shadowy figure dumping fertilizer across their front lawn. By morning, patches of their once pristine grass had turned an unnatural shade of yellow. It was juvenile, but effective in sending a message. "He's desperate," Olivia said as Ethan replayed the footage. "What are we going to do?" Ethan gritted his teeth. "We're not giving up. If he wants to play dirty, we'll stay one step ahead." Ethan sent the footage to the committee and filed a report with the local police. Though they couldn't confirm Greg's involvement yet, the pressure on him continued to mount. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and even some of Greg's staunchest supporters began to distance themselves. The once powerful homeowner association president was starting to look more and more like a liability. Then came the breaking point. One sunny afternoon, Ethan was in his driveway washing his car when an unfamiliar SUV pulled up. Out stepped a woman in a navy blue blazer, flanked by two men in suits. They introduced themselves as agents from the United States Postal Inspection Service. "Mr. Riley, we'd like to thank you for your cooperation," Agent Harris said, extending her hand. "The evidence you provided has been instrumental in our investigation. We'd like to ask you and your wife a few follow-up questions." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. He led the agents inside, where Olivia greeted them with coffee and the neatly organized folders of documentation Ethan had kept. For the next hour, the agents asked about everything: the mail tampering, the citations, and Greg's increasingly erratic behavior. By the end of the interview, Agent Harris assured them that charges were imminent. "If everything goes as planned," she said, "this case will be wrapped up soon. You've done the right thing by speaking up." 2 weeks later, the neighborhood woke up to a scene straight out of a crime drama. A black government SUV parked in front of Greg Larson's house as federal agents escorted him out in handcuffs. Residents gathered on their lawns, whispering and snapping pictures as Greg, looking disheveled and furious, was placed in the back of the car. The charges included mail tampering, harassment, and misuse of homeowner association funds. The independent review committee had uncovered that Greg had been embezzling money from the association for years, funneling funds into a private account he used to pay for vacations and luxury items. The fertilizer incident was just the latest in a long list of infractions. At an emergency homeowner association meeting held days later, the board voted unanimously to remove Greg from his position. The review committee presented their findings, and the community agreed to overhaul the homeowner association structure. New bylaws were drafted, ensuring greater transparency and limiting the president's powers. A rotating board of 5 members would now oversee decisions, and all financial transactions would require independent audits. Ethan was approached by several neighbors urging him to run for the new board. Initially reluctant, he eventually agreed, realizing how much the community needed fair and balanced leadership. "I'm not doing this alone," Ethan said to Olivia. "If we're going to rebuild trust here, it has to be a team effort." Olivia smiled. "You've already shown everyone what standing up for what's right looks like. I think you'll do great." The weeks that followed were transformative for Meadowbrook Heights. The neighborhood that once operated under Greg's oppressive rule began to blossom into a true community. Residents who had avoided homeowner association meetings now actively participated, voicing their concerns and proposing ideas to improve the area. The first community barbecue in years was held in the local park, with Ethan and Olivia among the organizers. Even Sophie had fun running around with other kids as laughter filled the air. As the sun set on the day of the barbecue, Ethan looked around at the smiling faces and the renewed sense of camaraderie. For the first time in a long while, Meadowbrook Heights felt like home. But even as the neighborhood moved forward, Ethan knew this wasn't the end of the story. Greg's legal battles were just beginning, and the shadow of his actions would linger for some time. Yet with every step, the community was proving that unity and resilience could overcome even the darkest chapters. With Greg Larson removed from power and the community rallying behind a fairer homeowner association system, life in Meadowbrook Heights began to stabilize. But for Ethan and Olivia, the fight had left a lasting impression and a lingering sense of unfinished business. Greg's trial became a highly anticipated event, drawing attention not just from Meadowbrook Heights but from neighboring communities. His charges, mail tampering, harassment, and embezzlement, were laid out in court, supported by overwhelming evidence. Ethan and several other residents testified, recounting the harm Greg's actions had caused. The verdict was swift. Greg was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to the homeowner association and affected residents. For Ethan, the sentencing brought a sense of justice, though he couldn't shake the feeling of how close their community had come to falling apart. Meanwhile, the new homeowner association board, with Ethan as a member, worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. They hosted town halls, simplified the rules, and created initiatives to foster community engagement. Olivia became a key figure in organizing events, using her background in marketing to revitalize the neighborhood's image. Together, they made Meadowbrook Heights a place where people truly felt at home. Months later, as the neighborhood basked in its newfound harmony, an unexpected development occurred. A developer expressed interest in purchasing a strip of land on the outskirts of Meadowbrook Heights. The land, a small wooded area, had been a quiet spot for joggers and kids playing tag. While some residents saw the potential for a new commercial complex, others feared it would disrupt the neighborhood's tranquility. At the next homeowner association meeting, the debate was heated. Proponents of the development highlighted the benefits: increased property values, convenient shops, and job creation. Opponents, including Ethan, argued for preserving the character of the neighborhood and the green space that so many cherished. "We've just started rebuilding trust and creating a sense of community," Ethan said passionately. "Do we really want to risk all of that for a strip mall?" The board decided to put the issue to a vote, ensuring every resident had a say. In the weeks leading up to the vote, Ethan led a campaign to explore alternative solutions, such as turning the land into a community park. Olivia created flyers, and Sophie even joined in by drawing pictures of trees and playgrounds to hand out to neighbors. When the votes were tallied, the decision was clear. The majority chose to preserve the land as a green space. The victory was a testament to the power of collective action and the community's newfound unity. To celebrate, the homeowner association organized a groundbreaking event for the new park. Ethan stood on a small stage, addressing the crowd that had gathered with shovels and saplings. "This isn't just about preserving trees or creating a playground," he said. "It's about what we've built together, a neighborhood where every voice matters. This park is a symbol of that." Cheers erupted as families began planting trees, marking the start of a new chapter for Meadowbrook Heights. In the years that followed, the park became a cornerstone of the community. It hosted picnics, outdoor movie nights, and even an annual festival that brought neighbors closer together. Ethan eventually stepped down from the homeowner association board, content knowing that the community was in good hands. He and Olivia focused on raising Sophie and welcoming their second child, a baby boy named Lucas. One evening, as Ethan sat on a bench in the park, watching Sophie push Lucas on a swing, a familiar figure approached. Greg Larson, looking older but more subdued, stood at the edge of the park. He hesitated before walking over. "Mr. Riley," Greg began, his voice softer than Ethan remembered, "I heard about what you've done with the neighborhood. It's impressive." Ethan regarded him carefully. "It's what the community wanted. Everyone played a part." Greg nodded, his gaze fixed on the playground. "I've had a lot of time to think about the mistakes I made. I know I can't undo them, but I'd like to help if you'll let me. Maybe as a volunteer?" Ethan studied him for a moment before extending a hand. "If you're serious about making amends, there's always work to be done." Greg shook his hand, gratitude flickering in his eyes. It wasn't a redemption arc, but it was a step toward healing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. The journey had been arduous, filled with challenges and doubts, but Meadowbrook Heights had emerged stronger. And in the process, Ethan had learned the true meaning of community: standing together, weathering storms, and finding common ground. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.